Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, we're discussing my thoughts on episode 7 of the anime series恋は雨上がりのように, or Love is Like After the Rain. And if I had to choose one word to summarize this episode, it would be intense. This episode was thoroughly intense to me, from the opening sort of altercation between Kondo and Tachibana, where she's just sort of primping him up on a pedestal, trying to implore him as to how special, he is to her and everything like that. And it's very much, the conversation takes a turn to the book that he checked out of the library through her help. And, was it a good book or not? Was it a good read or not? And he sort of matter-of-factly admits the fact that he's acquainted with, as he describes it, the book's author. And she is just wowed by this. She's enamored by this. And she has nothing but accolades to sing, praises to sing about him. And I don't want to say he snaps at her necessarily, but, he kind of lets the other leg drop in a very dramatic tone to say, you don't really know anything about me. And it's such a bittersweet, impactful way that he imparts this. You could see the world just crushes on Tachibana's shoulders in that moment. And it's understandable when, answering to my speculation in my previous episode discussion video, but also was a topic of discussion in the comments on that video, that in all likelihood, this is probably his ex, who is the author of that book. And, it's understandable that he would be so, still mulling this over, impacted by it with, that book embodies the success of the person he's no longer spending his life with. As somebody sort of pointed out, it's kind of interesting to think with his passion for literature and her being a writer, they probably had a mutual passion for that. And that's what drew them together to begin with. But of course, that would end up faltering and they'd become estranged. And so it's easy to see why he would be so bitter about that. And he kind of almost, in a very understated manner, almost takes out his frustration on Tachibana. And then she's kind of like a lost puppy. From that point on. She still goes to work the next day. It's a typhoon, it's pouring rain. And Kondo's out. Kondo's gone. And it's interesting. The entire time in this episode, our resident blonde D-bag in the kitchen, Kase, there was a moment where when that crushing blow came from Kondo, as it impacted Tachibana, you don't know anything about me. Kase was about to go into that little lunchroom or that little office area to have lunch, and he restrained himself. And I was somewhat impressed by that. As big of a jerk face as he is, it was almost borderlining chivalrous that he backed away from that. Because in that moment, he would have very much put Tachibana on the spot. I mean, she's already been impacted by the first derogatory toned thing she's ever had said to her by this guy she holds in such high esteem, that she's so smitten with. But then imagine the insult to injury that would add if suddenly her sort of nemesis in the restaurant comes walking through the door, and suddenly she's, thinking 1,000 thoughts at once, like, did he hear what happened? Did he hear the exchange? How much of it did he hear? Is he going to hold it over my head? Is he going to rub it in my face? Whatever like that. And it could have made matters that much worse. So I did lightly applaud, even though he is still a D-bag, I did lightly applaud his, restraining himself and not going into the room to have his lunch. But through the entirety of the episode, he is mostly restraining himself, even though he does at one point, say to her blonde school chum, are you blind? Are you dense? As far as, is nobody else picking up how she feels about Kondo and everything like that? Of course, he has the leg up on everybody. He knows all about that and everything. But he doesn't really go out of his way to do anything more than be the crushing blow of common sense again, as far as instructing Tachibana in a manner of speaking to back off a little bit. And if she gets too hot and heavy, she's going to potentially push Kondo away, even if that might be something he'd want to pursue. If you're too gung-ho about it, if you're too up in his face, if you're constantly around every corner, and he can't get away from you at all, and he can't wrap his mind around that and format that, and sort of figure out for himself if he wants to pursue that. If he's constantly being dogged by you, you're just going to push him away. And that's the honest truth, you know. And that kind of, I think, informs where her mind is already at when she goes into work and the typhoon is pouring down this rain and everything. And Kondo is nowhere to be found. He's apparently out sick. And if I were in her shoes, a million things would be going through my head at that point, like, oh, you know, and she does. She calls back on that altercation, that verbal, you know, sort of impact of what he said in a means, I think, to identify that she's like, did I make him stay out? Is him being sick just an excuse? And she is so consumed with this. I mean, she drops an ice cream sundae, and she's scatterbrained, and she can't quite keep her mind on her work and everything. And I was really actually surprised. I wasn't surprised when you hear the knocking on the door, the ringing of the doorbell, whatever it is. I knew it was going to be her, but I was a little bit surprised that that was her next move. After work, she immediately makes a beeline for Kondo's apartment. But that entire sequence between them both, when he finally lets her in, and he's got the mask on, he is thoroughly sick. For realsies. You know, it's not, he didn't take the day off because he can't handle the pressure of her, you know, glomming onto him. I don't think that even entered his frame of mind. He's very apologetic when she turns that phrase back toward him, you know, oh, well, I don't really know you. I wish, you know, I was being honest and truthful when I said I want to get to know you and all this stuff. And he feels very put upon. He feels remorseful for what he said and the way in which he said it. And there's just some real talk between them in that entire sequence as it plays out. And I was absolutely riveted to it. And then when he starts to sort of think to himself, you know, she's glad that the way she feels about him makes him happy. But of course, there is still that reluctance on his part. And in that moment where he kind of sort of rationalizes, well, in a manner of speaking, if I embrace her, if I empower her, you know, it'll be like I'm setting her free. You know, if I let her know that she is cared about, that her feelings are met with appreciation, you know, if not reciprocation, I can lift her up and you know, she can spread her wings and she'll be able to find herself. And I don't have to be the thing, you know, with which she is consumed by and revolves around solely. And when he finally reaches out to her, it's quite interesting how it almost flips on its side what was about to happen. He's, you know, like an adult coming to embrace a child in a sense to comfort her and everything like that. But the way in which he falls into her, you know, it's almost like he's succumbing to this fantasy, and it's like he's constantly trying to empower himself and convince himself, you know, this is platonic. This isn't me succumbing to my nostalgia or some sexual fantasy or something, you know, lascivious like that. It's pure. It's pure-hearted. It's honest. It's hopeful. And it's really the closest embodiment Kondo has gotten to this point of realizing what she's giving him, in a sense, you know, that self-worth that has been lacking on his part, she's giving him worth because she thinks the world of him. And that embrace, it sort of becomes, rather than an embrace to comfort her, it's sort of shocking and stymieing to her, and it's the answer to everything she wants and desires, but it's more about him comforting himself, in a manner of speaking, in the end. And I love how he sort of, you know, becomes aware of it, and he grabs her by the shoulders and pushes her away. And he's like, this was friends. This was, you know, I'm just hugging you as a friend, you know, a supportive friend. She's friend zoned by her boss, her adult, many years older boss. And, that cracked me up. And then he passes out, you know, for a little bit because of the sickness, because of the cold. We don't see it right away. They flash back on it later, but, you know, he puts her in a taxi and just thanks her so very much for coming over, for stopping by, for sharing, you know, all of her supportive words and literal physical support and everything. And of course, it flips it all on its ear again, because then he's back in work the next day and she's out. She's gotten the cold. Her sister, her mother, whatever it is, who has to go to work, she's like blaming her, like, oh, you had to go to work in the typhoon. Now you're sick and you can't go to work. Nice job. Being completely oblivious to everything that transpired. And the intensity ramps up there, because she's kind of having these almost sexual fever dreams about him, about that embrace, and I'll be damned if she's not, she doesn't make a noise that sounds like it was orgasmic to her. It's amazing what fevers and fever dreams will do to your brain, and those waking dreams, those lucid dreams and everything. So it was obviously impacting her in that moment, and it was, again, intense. The word for this episode, intense. And but it still had the same overarching, endearing me to them, and this dynamic that's going on between them, that's burgeoning, that's evolving. It almost felt like there was some level of his finally wrapping his mind around how she feels about him in a way that he can appreciate it, in a way that maybe he's opening himself to thinking about the development of this and pursuing it. And I don't know. I think he will still be reluctant. I still think he's going to try to talk himself out of it. But there was, for lack of a better term, a level of growth in his, the way he's approaching it, the way he's thinking about it, the way he succumbed to that desire to support her. Again, it wasn't a lascivious desire in that moment. It wasn't impure. It wasn't because it was some fantasy, sitting back on his haunches that relate to nostalgia and all this kind of stuff. It was legitimate. In that moment, he found a way to be there with her and for her at the same time. And again, it flips it on its side, because he's the one being comforted by the embrace. He sought to embrace her, to comfort her, but he's the one who can take comfort from it. And it's just, I really like these two characters. I really like the idea of their coming together. And there's still, until we see the last shot of the last episode, it's still going to be uncertain. Do they end up together? Do they become, a couple of sorts? Do they develop a relationship? They don't necessarily need to full on, blatantly explicitly state that, yes, we're going to start dating, we're going to have a relationship. But I would at least like to be left with this idea that it isn't ambiguous, that, yes, they if they haven't ended up together by the end, they will. That's where they're aligning toward, that kind of thing. Because they're so endeared to me on this journey, on this explorative journey where they're trying to piece together how they feel about each other. I mean, he's very much still sort of keeping her at arm's length and friend-zoned her, as I said. But it's comedic, and it's endearing, and it's heartwarming. It's like, I wish I could find something like this in my own life, that kind of thing. This very just loving, compassionate, really being thoroughly interested in each other and having so much to teach each other and learn from each other and everything like that. It's just really sweet to me in the way this show, depicts it in any case. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of episode 7 of恋は雨上がりのように, or Love is Like After the Rain. If you've seen it as well, if you enjoyed it as much as I did, what you took away from the sort of, altercation interchange that was going on between Kondo and Tachibana all throughout the episode, the conflict there that she was so consumed by, and was kind of, again, like a lost puppy. She couldn't find her way until she went and had that talking out with him and everything like that, and what you thought of his embracing her. Do you agree with me that, in a sense, he's finally begun to format himself to thinking about her in more than just, push her away? She's young. She has a life ahead of herself. I think he still will, to a point. But again, I think it's finally, the inkling is starting to seep into his mind that there could be something there. Something could develop. And I'd love to hear from you if you agree. If you disagree, our POVs can thoroughly, disagree. It's all about the topic of talk. And whether or not, you had a good time watching this episode, I'd love to hear it either way. So otherwise, that'll be pretty much it for me on this video. Find you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.